California store creep exposed. Shocking incident at Whole Foods. Man accused of exposing himself and assaulting women in California store. A disturbing incident at a Whole Foods store in Valencia, California has sparked outrage after security footage captured a man allegedly exposing himself to a female shopper and engaging in inappropriate behavior. Now let's explore this story in detail and uncover the facts on our AI podcast.
Find yourself standing right in the middle of a grocery store aisle, staring completely blankly at, say, 40 different bottles of olive oil.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and you suddenly realize you have absolutely no idea how long you've been standing there.
Yeah.
Like you are completely zoned out.
Just totally frozen in place.
Right. Your shopping cart is sitting diagonally, blocking half the aisle. You're holding a jar of capers you don't even need. And your brain is essentially, on standby.
Yeah, it happens to all of us.
It really does. You walk into a brightly lit supermarket on a random Tuesday night. The ambient music is playing softly. The shelves are perfectly color coordinated, and your brain's threat detection system just powers completely down.
It really does power it.
Because you are there to pick up some almond milk, maybe figure out what's for dinner, and that is the absolute extent of the stakes for you.
Well, there is actually a neurological term for what your brain is doing in that olive oil aisle.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
There's a term for it.
Yeah, it's called predictive processing because our brains, they consume an enormous amount of energy constantly scanning our environment for novelties or threats.
Okay, that makes sense.
So to save that energy, when we enter a highly familiar, highly structured environment like a premium grocery store, the brain basically stops actively processing everything around us.
Wow, so it just goes on autopilot.
Exactly. It instead just predicts what is going to happen next. We function almost entirely on a mental script.
Right, like we assume the lighting will stay on.
We assume the lighting stays on, the floors will be clean, and crucially, we expect everyone else in the building to be following that exact same mundane script.
Yeah, but when that script gets violently interrupted, it does something really profound to us.
It definitely does.
It doesn't just impact the people directly involved. It sends a shockwave through the entire community that shares that space. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
We are taking a stack of localized reporting, police descriptions, and community reactions regarding a deeply disturbing incident that happened recently.
Yeah, it's a tough one to read through.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission today isn't just to recount the timeline of a local crime for you. We want to take these source materials and unpack a much larger, frankly, more unsettling theme.
Which is so important to look at.
Right. We want to look at what this single event reveals about the psychological assumptions of safety that you and I make every single day in everyday public spaces.
So the source material we are examining today details an investigation into an assault. And this took place at a Whole Foods store in Valencia, California.
At a Whole Foods. Just, totally normal setting.
Right. And the stark contrast between the setting, which is essentially a premium, highly curated sanctuary of mundane, and the brazen nature of the act itself, well, that's what makes this so incredibly jarring to analyze.
Oh, absolutely.
It forces us to take a magnifying glass to how fragile our feeling of safety actually is when we are just, running errands.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because as someone who spends probably way too much time wandering grocery store aisles on autopilot, I found myself getting genuinely stuck on how quickly a totally normal, boring Tuesday night errand can just shatter a community's sense of security.
It happens in an instant.
Yeah. We need to look at exactly what happened step by step because the timeline and the setting they're crucial to understanding the psychology of the event.
Right. So let's establish the scene based on the reports we have. This happened on March 23rd, just before 8 p.m. at the Valencia Whole Foods.
Okay.
Think about the specific vibe of a grocery store at 8 o'clock at night.
Right. The frantic post-work dinner rush is usually died down by then.
Exactly. It's generally a quieter, much more relaxed time to shop. People are unwinding, taking their time, reading labels.
So the physical space is populated but not crowded.
Exactly. And the report describes a female shopper who is doing exactly what you or I have done 1,000 times.
Just browsing.
Yeah, she was kneeling down in an aisle to browse items on the lower shelves.
Oh, wow. When you think about the physical posture of that, you realize you drop your guard completely.
You really do.
Like you are physically vulnerable, your center of gravity is very low, your focus is entirely zeroed in on a tiny price tag or nutritional label.
And your peripheral vision is basically reduced to zero in that position.
Exactly. You literally can't see anything around you.
Right. And according to the surveillance footage reviewed by authorities, that is the exact moment the suspect enters the picture.
Just as she's kneeling there.
Yes. The man walked into the store, navigated through the aisles, and then began to approach this specific woman. But he didn't just walk up to her immediately.
He didn't.
No, he lingered. The footage shows him pretending to look at products, using the everyday, repetitive actions of shopping to camouflage his true intent.
Ugh, that's chilling.
What's fascinating here is how he positioned himself. He was getting unusually close to her while she remained completely focused on the bottom shelves.
See, I want to talk about the unwritten rules of a grocery store here, because it's very much like a library, right, or a crowded elevator.
Yeah, it's a great comparison.
We have a strict, silent social contract regarding personal space in these environments. It acts like an invisible force field.
It really does.
If you are in an aisle and someone else is already looking at something, the rule is you wait at a polite distance, or you say, "Excuse me," and quickly pass by.
Right, you definitely don't just hover.
You never,
What?
ever just silently hover a few inches away from someone who is kneeling down. Because we are relying on predictive processing, like you mentioned earlier, we use that invisible force field of social etiquette as a substitute for actual physical security.
That's spot on.
We just trust that everyone else is obeying the contract.
But the perpetrator actively weaponized that exact invisible force field.
He used our trust against us.
Exactly. He used the camouflage of mundane shopping behavior to completely bypass the victim's natural defenses. Because you and I are on autopilot in aisle 4, our brains are literally programmed to filter out people who are looking at products on shelves.
We just instantly categorize them as fellow shoppers.
Right. The brain slaps a label on them that says safe and irrelevant.
Safe and irrelevant, wow.
And he exploited that cognitive blind spot. By pretending to inspect products, he ensured that if anyone glanced down the aisle or if the victim herself caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, his presence wouldn't trigger any alarm bells.
So it wasn't impulsive.
Not at all. The surveillance footage highlights a deeply premeditative strategy.
And that premeditation makes the sudden transition into the actual assault incredibly terrifying to read about.
It's very disturbing.
Building directly from that lingering proximity, the situation escalated. The suspect didn't just break the social contract of personal space, he completely violated the victim in a very predatory way.
Yes. The authorities state that the suspect exposed himself to the woman and made inappropriate physical contact. And the surveillance footage is reportedly definitive on this. It captures him leaning over her, placing himself in a disturbing, invasive, and dominant position.
Right over this woman who was trapped in that kneeling posture.
Yes, she was just trying to look at a shelf.
Just the sheer physical mechanics of that. Leaning over someone who is kneeling and focused downward. It's trapping them in a space where they have no leverage and no immediate line of sight.
You're completely cornered without realizing it.
But here is the detail from the report that I genuinely, I cannot wrap my head around.
Which part?
After committing this incredibly invasive, boundary-breaking act in the middle of a brightly lit, populated grocery store, the report explicitly notes that the suspect calmly exited the store.
Yeah. He simply walked away from the aisle and out the front doors.
Okay, help me understand this. How does someone commit an act that brazen, an assault like that, where you would expect, I don't know, immediate screaming, chaos, or a physical confrontation?
Right.
And then just casually stroll out through the sliding glass doors, past the cash registers in the produce section?
This raises an important question about the deeply ingrained neuroscience of how human beings process sudden trauma in safe spaces.
Okay.
We are conditioned by movies to imagine that a public crime instantly results in dramatic action. People rushing to tackle the guy, alarms sounding, immediate heroic intervention.
Like someone yelling, "Stop that man!"
Exactly, but the reality of human psychology is entirely different. Predators rely heavily on a phenomenon called normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias. Break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
Well, normalcy bias is a cognitive state where the brain essentially refuses to believe a disaster or a threat is happening because it has never happened in this specific environment before.
Oh, wow.
So when a victim is completely blindsided in an environment where they feel 100% secure, like a Whole Foods, the brain's initial physiological response is to freeze.
It just shuts down.
The amygdala, which is the brain's threat processing center, gets completely overwhelmed by the jarring disconnect between the safe environment and the violent act.
So the brain is essentially throwing an error code.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's saying, this cannot be happening to me right now because I am in the baking aisle at Whole Foods.
Yes, and that creates a dangerous lag in reaction time. The brain frantically searches its mental filing cabinet for a script on how to handle an assault in aisle 3, and it comes up completely empty.
Because there is no script for that.
Right. It takes precious seconds, sometimes much longer, for the victim and any surrounding bystanders to shake off that normalcy bias and even comprehend what just occurred.
And the perpetrator knows this.
The perpetrator knows this window exists. They use that window of profound confusion and physiological freeze to their advantage.
Which totally explains the calm exit.
Yes.
If he had sprinted away at top speed, knocking over displays, that would have instantly shattered the normalcy bias of everyone else in the store.
Exactly. By acting calm and walking away at a normal pace, he didn't draw any secondary visual attention to himself. He blended right back into the camouflage of a normal shopper leaving the building.
The physical description of the suspect released by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department really drives home how ordinary he looked too.
What did they release?
They're searching for a man in his 30s, black hair, brown eyes, just over 6 feet tall, weighing around 220 pounds. He was wearing a denim shirt and jeans.
A denim shirt and jeans.
Right. There is absolutely nothing in that description that triggers the threat response.
Yeah.
He isn't wearing a ski mask. He isn't dressed in a way that stands out at all.
He looks exactly like a guy who just picked up some groceries after a long day at work.
Yeah. He relied on being entirely unremarkable. He weaponized normalcy from the very moment he walked through the sliding doors to the moment he walked out of them.
And that realization is what creates such a massive ripple effect in the aftermath of an event like this.
Yeah, because you don't have an incident like this happen without the entire ecosystem of that public space reacting.
No, it changes everything for the people there.
When a shared environment is violated in this way, you get very distinct, sometimes conflicting reactions from the corporation that owns the space and the community that actually occupies it.
Which we see perfectly in the source materials for this case.
Right. Let's look at the corporate response first. Whole Foods did exactly what you would anticipate from a major retailer in a crisis.
Very by the book.
A spokesperson issued a prompt statement expressing serious concern over the incident. They stated unequivocally that customer safety and well-being remain their top priority.
Which is standard PR language.
Very standard. They acknowledged the gravity of what happened and emphasized their ongoing commitment to maintaining a secure shopping environment for everyone.
Like you said, it's highly polished crisis communication. We are committed to a secure shopping environment.
But then when you look at the community response detailed in the local recording, the tone is entirely different and, frankly, much more raw.
Very much so.
They interviewed a local Valencia resident, a frequent shopper at this specific store, named Ellie Perico.
Right, I read that part.
Her reaction was pure shock. She talked about how deeply unsettling it is for something this violating to happen in a place that the community generally considers a safe haven.
It shakes your foundation.
It does. And then she said something really striking. She suggested that incidents like this challenge the community's entire sense of security, and she stated that perhaps people are too trusting in public spaces.
It's a poignant observation that clearly resonated with the public. The report notes that this incident triggered strong, visceral reactions across social media and local networks.
People were really upset.
Users were condemning the act as disturbing, inappropriate, and deeply troubling. The digital response reflects a sudden feeling of collective vulnerability.
So what does this all mean? I have pushed back a little on Ellie Perico's observation, though.
Oh, really? How so?
She says we are too trusting in public spaces. But wait, is it actually a flaw to be trusting?
That's a fair point.
Because if you and I walk around a grocery store treating every single person looking at a can of beans like they are a potential predator, society basically collapses, right? Aren't we forced to be trusting just to function in daily life?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the core paradox of living in a modern society. You are entirely correct that trust is not a character flaw.
Right.
It is a fundamental requirement for a functioning community. We have to trust the strangers around us to obey the invisible force field of the social contract.
Otherwise we'd go crazy.
Exactly. If we operate in a constant state of hypervigilance, treating every shopper, every person on the sidewalk, every person in a coffee shop as an immediate physical threat, our nervous systems would just burn out.
We physically couldn't handle it.
No. And the business model of a relaxed, welcoming retail environment relies entirely on the premise that you will let your guard down.
So when Whole Foods promises a secure shopping environment, they're essentially talking about preventing slip and fall accidents, ensuring food safety, and maybe stopping shoplifters from walking out with expensive vitamins.
Right, baseline liabilities.
They aren't actually equipped to prevent unpredictable, premeditated psychological and physical assaults by one customer against another.
They really aren't.
To actually prevent that, you would need a security guard physically escorting every single shopper down every single aisle.
Which would obviously destroy the very concept of a grocery store.
Right. No one would shop there.
This contradiction highlights the true, lasting damage of the Valencia incident. The damage isn't confined to the isolated crime itself, horrifying as that is for the victim.
Yeah, the true damage is the psychological ripple effect.
Exactly. It's the way this event violently forces everyday shoppers to suddenly abandon their predictive processing.
You can't just run in and grab something anymore.
Right. It forces a mother grabbing milk for her kids or someone just trying to unwind after work to view their safe local spaces with a sudden, exhausting layer of suspicion.
That's the loss of that sanctuary we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Yeah, total loss of sanctuary.
If you can't be perfectly safe kneeling down to look at a box of cereal on a Tuesday night, where can you actually drop your guard?
It's a heavy question.
It really brings us back to the core theme we set out to explore today. A completely routine errand became this stark, undeniable reminder of the fragility of our public social contracts.
It did.
It showed us the jarring reality that all the bright lights, the ambient music, and the polished corporate statements in the world cannot actually guarantee our physical safety if the person standing next to us decides to simply ignore the rules of society.
It forces every single person who reads this report to reevaluate what we instinctively accept as a safe space.
Yeah, we really have to separate things out.
We are required to mentally separate the mechanisms that are actually in place to physically protect us from the mechanisms that are merely there to record what happens to us.
Which brings up a really unsettling thought to leave you with today.
What's that?
Well, we talked about Ellie Perico's observation that we are forced to be trusting in public spaces, and we talked about how the perpetrator weaponized that trust.
Right.
But consider the role of the technology in that building. The store's surveillance cameras perfectly captured the suspect's lingering.
They got all of it on tape.
They captured his camouflage.
Yeah.
They perfectly recorded his premeditation, the entire boundary-breaking assault, and his calm, uninterrupted exit.
Every single moment.
But the cameras did absolutely nothing to physically stop the assault from happening to that woman.
Nothing at all.
So, given that reality, how does the modern knowledge that we are constantly being watched by high-definition lenses change, or fundamentally fail to change, our actual physical safety in the places we take for granted every single day?
Okay, one question for you. What does this disturbing incident reveal about safety in public spaces that are generally considered secure? And what additional measures should stores implement to ensure customers, especially women, feel protected while shopping? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.